defense and strategy in the 20th century. All right, so that's the first course we'll treat. So I will take the first topic under that course, definition and survey of defense and strategy. So without wasting much time, I will be fast anyway. So what this course is all about, is the development, in the two most important areas of statecraft, from the ages, especially up to the 20th century. And the 20th century marked a watershed in defense and strategy because these two phenomena became particularly different from what they used to be as a result of the new development in the 20th century. The two major developments, the outbreak of the First World War and the Second World War. Okay, so these developments were the outbreak of the First World War and the Second World War in their scope and impact. It were quite unprecedented in the history of mankind. This is because the two world wars, as they were called, affected every segment of human society, of humanity, and were prosecuted with large amount of resources, manpower, materials, all right, that have not been used in the history of mankind. Also, the 20th century witnessed a weapon of mass destruction, the nuclear weapons, for instance, which existence has been of a major concern to humanity since its invention. And it was this that made the fate of mankind to be dependent on the use of armament, all right, to maintain defense and security among states. And this is because the weapon, the nuclear weapon has the capacity to obliterate humankind and civilization if not well managed. So the existence of nuclear armament, therefore occupies a central stage in the consideration of defense and strategy. That has not been the case, since the history of mankind, before the 20th century. So defense and strategy are closely related. I'm going to the definition now. These are two concepts that are closely, related in the art or state craftsmanship of international relations. So it deals with the management of the affairs of the state. Defense and strategy deals, all right, with the management of the affairs of the security of the state and the global community. Even though the terms defense has assumed various meaning, depending on which context it is being used, it is generally agreed to mean the protection and security against threats, anything that constitutes danger to the interests of a person, a group, or a state. Right? Among philosophers, political scientists, historians, and people of informed intellectual opinion, the state has often established itself as indispensable to humankind and civilization. Philosophers, for instance, and political scientists have hypothesized, all right, conceptualized, theorized about the situation of humankind outside the state. So in this situation, everybody was a law to him or herself, and there was nobody to regulate the conduct of human beings. So as a result of this, insecurity, violence were the orders of the day. So this situation was described as the situation of the state of nature, and in which life was said to be short, solitary, brutish, all right, and relations among members of the society were characterized by war of all against all. So the situation was also described by Thomas Hobbes, by one in which man was a wolf to his fallen fellow men, human beings. So to avoid this unpalatable situation, humankind at a hypothetical point in time agreed to give individual sovereignty to government of the state. All right, and this is where the question of defense, came in, and this was in exchange for the greatest possession of man, especially in terms of protection of the life of man. So exactly what should be the exchange of power, of the state has been a subject of lively debate and controversy among scholars and philosophers. But the fact that the state should be the extent of the exercise, of sovereignty over people they rule, constitute a major subject in defense and strategy, and the scope, therefore, all right, involves protecting lives and keeping law and order, especially in times of chaos. Also, is that the state has been variously defined in various contexts. even though its definition has been subjected to criticism, the definition of Professor Kinyeye in this course, all right, and other scholars is very, very important for you to analyze, which summarizes the essence of a state. All right, for instance, look at Woodrow Wilson, who defined the state as the people organized for law within a definite territory. All right, so though simple and straightforward, inherent in this definition are the requirement for a state to be constituted. First, the element of the population, demography, people, all right, so is one of the key aspects of this state, the idea of the state. In terms of population or demography, a state can be as large as China, or in terms of population, or as small as the Togo here. You understand. Also, in terms of geography, state can be as large as Russia, which has 12% of the world's landmass, or as small as Gambia. So the ultimate thing is that the state must have its own government, organization, law, for the protection of lives, all right, and properties of the citizen. So the state must have some level of sovereignty, all right, the absolute power to control, all right, absolute power of control of the state, all right, over the territory and its inhabitants. That is where the idea of defense and strategy comes in. The primary interest of the state in terms of in the context of defense and strategy, the primary interests of the state are those interests which the state is required to do, in terms of providing security, all right, to protect the sovereignty of the state and also the security for the people. In international relations, the sovereignty of the state as well as the integrity of its territory are regarded as the primary essence of the state. The protection of these interests invariably falls within the purview of defense. Okay, so thus states primary interest is defense, in spite of whatever situation that happened. And in this context, we could see the case of the Russian and Ukraine war. In spite of the fact that Russia is a nuclear power and Ukraine is none. So because even though the president of Ukraine was a comedian, a comedian in his 40s, who was appointed as the president, but once attaining the position of the president of Ukraine, and when the Russian incursion came in over to threaten the sovereignty of Ukraine, no matter how weak Ukraine is or how unserious the president, who was a former comedian, is, he has to protect the the sovereignty of Ukraine, as you have seen him going all about. Last week was in the US. So defense is therefore the protection and security of the interests of the state against danger and threat from any quarter, just like what you see President Zelensky of Ukraine doing currently. Last week he had it out with Trump, right? And this week he's meeting with the European leaders, trying to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine against the external incursion of Russia. So side by side with defense is strategy. So like defense, the concept of like strategy, all right. So the concept of defense, all right, the concept of strategy has assumed various stages of meaning down the ages. This is because it has been adopted in various spheres of human endeavors. Hence, it is common to hear game strategy, all right, economic, political, business strategy in the discourse on international relations. That is to say, the word is used in various contexts. The word strategy is used in various contexts, but etymologically it is from the Greek origin stratejo, so which is the act of the general in conducting a war. Since the conduct of war entails several spheres and phases, other concepts have also been confused with strategy. All right, that is to say that among these tactics and stratagem. All right, so even though the three concepts are all related in a way, with the acts and conduct of warfare, they are all different. Tactics is related to strategy, but it is very different in many contexts. Tactics, all right, is according to some established authorities or scholars, is used in war, all right, and warfare, such as von Senovic, all right, and Andrew Beweford Wilberforce, who argued that strategy is the art of organization and deployment of troops on the battlefield in such a way as to derive the maximum advantage from their weapons and the terrain of battle. Okay, so it is also on the other way. It is on the other way. It is also a deceptive action, used by troops on the battlefield to confuse their adversaries, their enemies, to their own advantage. So strategy in war has to do with the overall views, organization, and disposition in using battle to achieve the goal of the war. Hence, strategy in the large sense and in the context of this course, defense and strategy has to do with overall disposition, of the general, the general of a particular country's military force in prosecuting a war. All right, and this is very key, definition. So these are the meanings of strategy, that could be used to marshal your points in the exam. So in the context of international relations, again, strategy has to do with the role and use of force in the management of relations among states and nations. Okay, so in the international relations strategy, all right, concept, it also involves actual fighting in most cases, open hostility. As a matter of fact, according to Zhu, a Chinese, the Chinese military philosopher, strategy works best when the object of war is achieved, without less fighting. So that is, physical hostility must come to play. All right, even though some scholars have disagreed with this position, who argue that it doesn't, it is not one of the best means of prosecuting war. Hostility is not one of the best means of prosecuting a war. All right, but down the ages, statesmen have had to resort to strategy of war, in the defense of their own states. And this is because we have seen that in the case of Ukraine, against Russia. This is because of the operation of the two critical factors in war and warfare. So you have to defend. All right, you have to be aggressive sometimes. All right, even if you are the vulnerable, you have to maintain some level of aggression to be able to assert yourself in, defending your sovereignty. So these are the primary factor in the and the contingent factor, regarding the concept of strategy and defense, or defense and strategy. The permanent operating factors in warfare are such factors over which statesmen have no control, but are very critical to the protection and security of the interests of the state, all right, against any threat. So what are these permanent operating factors? They include the geography, the location of the state, topography, the season, the weather of the state. All of these have been used, all right, in ages, all right, to prosecute or to defend their state against war. You have seen that in different contexts. So the nature of all of these factors have helped to shape the concept of defense and strategy. I think this is just a general understanding. Let me consider the second topic, defense and strategy in the 20th century, and I will discuss it along with the third, the 20th century as a watershed in the in defense and strategy. Then, if it's possible, I will lump it with the third topic, the First World War and defense and strategy. Okay, this is a very, very interesting question, and I think the two questions might certainly come out from this, all of these three topics that I've read. So the 20th century arguably witnessed more changes than any comparable period in period of times in history, in human history. But there were also long-term continuities of this war beyond the 20th century, we know. But 20th century was quite significant because new technologies and political ideologies shaped the course of world history, shaped the course of defense and strategy in unforeseeable ways. Yet, the struggle for power, remained a constant factor in defense and strategy and international relations. So, while different empires rose and fell in the past, those events usually reflect the ups and downs of economic and political competition among the great powers. And one of such is, for instance, a rise, the fact that a rise or fall in the economic strength of one nation would often alter the balance of military power in a particular region or even in the international system. And usually this in turn affects international alliance, defense and strategy, as it was witnessed during the outbreak of the First World War, where countries were aligning with each other in a way to protect their own sovereignty. So what we are trying to say is that during the 20th century, the defense and strategy were technically affected by several factors: economic vitality of countries, their military might, and political influence. All of this, which were intertwined, although affected the concept or the idea of defense and strategy in the 20th century. Underlying the three great wars or the three conflicts of the 20th century, that is the First World War, the Second World War, and later the Cold War, all right, after the 1950s. Underlying these three wars was the ceaseless international struggle to maintain, on the one hand, wealth, power, and security, but majorly to be the dominant countries in the idea of defense and strategy. Each of the countries were trying to emerge as the global hegemon in terms of which country had the most sophisticated defense strategy, or do you understand, defense or attacking strategy. So at the turn of the 20th century, the world was an interdependent system of nations. All right, those centuries, which was centered around four states, basically, which were Great Britain, France, Germany, and Russia. Okay, so these were the countries that redefined the idea of defense and strategy in international relations. Of course, we knew the background, the backdrop to all of this. A wave of European imperialism that had begun in the mid 1880s was at its height, as the four great imperial powers competed for supremacy in Africa and in Asia. Britain, among them, the industrial and the financial capital of the world, had actually sought new markets and natural resources to fuel its industrial machines. Okay, Germany, also a united nation since 1871, was also determined to challenge Britain's dominance. Okay, and looking at France, France, fearing the consequences of German growth, needed to build its own strength. You can see the concept of defense here coming in place. France, fearing the consequences of German growth, needed to build its own strength. And Russia also wanted to expand its territory and to acquire a port that would be ice free all the year round. Also competed, and all of these factors push the European countries to want to defend or expand the frontiers of their own territory. All right, they have to put in place sophisticated defense mechanisms and even attacking strategy against the enemies that would want to defend their own territory. So imperial competition was also indirectly responsible for a series of secret alliances between several European nations, which would have disastrous consequences by the beginning of 1914. So at the same time, the United States, all right, and Japan were also beginning to challenge the global domination of the Europeans in terms of defense and strategy, to becoming global hegemon, because the US was already emerging by this period as one of the most powerful nations. All right, so and Japan too had become highly or technically industrialized. Okay, so fueled by a vibrant industrial economy and massive immigration, the US began to expand its political power in the late 19th century, all right, colonizing several small islands in the Caribbean. American leaders in this context believed that their financial dominance in the Western Hemisphere would permit them to assert their power, okay, while preventing European nations from infiltrating the region. So Japan, for its own part, had also embarked on a remarkable program of modernization, all right, and economic expansion, but it possessed relatively few natural resources. So to meet these pressing needs of its growing population and economy, Japan, acquired a number of colonial holdings in the South Pacific and the Chinese mainland. These are the issues you must stress when you are looking at the question, about the defense and strategy in the 20th century. These are the underlying issue that occurred, that offset, that made the 20th century a watershed in defense. That's the question number 3 now. You can see the connection between those topics. So I will explain that again. So it is the quest by these dominant powers, either in Europe, all right, or America or Asia, like Japan, to want to extend the frontiers of their boundary, to other places that actually led to hostilities among nations. So Japan acquired a large colonial holdings in South Pacific, as I've mentioned, on the Chinese mainland. So by the eve of the Great War, in 1914, Japan was already poised to become the first nation outside Europe to join the rank of European powers, all right, in trying to assert itself as one of the sophisticated powers in terms of defense and strategy. So since the mid 19th century, the established imperial powers had also relied on treaties and diplomatic negotiations to manage disputes, to contain regional conflicts, and limit the spread of warfare. But unfortunately, the rise of new powers, especially Germany, offset this equilibrium. And dramatic advances in transportation and communication technologies, also place new pressures on international defense and strategy and international relations, threatening Britain's commercial dominance, for instance, in Europe. So as Europe braced up for war in the summer of 1914, no one could have foreseen how the world would be changed. Right, this is a precursor to the topic on defense and strategy in the 20th century. The third topic on the outline that says the 20th century as a watershed in defense and strategy. Okay, so this topic is very, very interesting. Indeed, the 20th century marks a watershed in defense and strategy and international relations because of the fact that the outbreak of the First World War during the first decade of the 20th century destroyed the geopolitical system inherited from the 19th century, with all the arrangements, Vienna, Treaty of, all the arrangement, international agreement between European countries. Between 1914 and 1918, at least 10 million people were killed. Great empires were toppled, and much of Europe was devastated at the beginning of the 20th century. So the 20th century was a watershed indeed. The war that broke out, the First World War, represented the culmination of military rivalries that had been intensifying since the turn of the 20th century. What happened in the 1914, for instance, was that the great powers in Europe failed to contain a regional dispute, which then escalated into a full-scale global war. Okay, so this failure was due in part to the system of alliance and war plans that developed in the context of defense and strategy all over Europe. And this structure, all right, this systemic failure security failure, also affected, the rest of the world. But fundamentally, it affected the international relations and defense and strategy, basically. But fundamentally, the First World War was largely the result of Germany's political ambition. All right, so there's no way you want to respond to this watershed, all right, without making strong emphasis, on Germany's political ambition. All right, first, for instance, the total war in history, had profound socio-economic repercussions. All right, wartime demand for industrial production, as a result of the outbreak of the World War, First World War, affected several things. It affected industrial production, foodstuff. It affected military recruits, which led to new, levels of state intervention and government regulation. Also, the 20th century was a watershed in the sense that national government became heavily involved in the economic production and social policy, and this brought about it had intense political consequences. So, in addition to the enlisting of auxiliary military units, women entered the domestic workforce in unprecedented numbers. All right, colonies also supplied military personnel, all right, to support their major colonizer. You could see, how the 20th century was a watershed in defense and strategy, because countries in the periphery, all right, had to supply, to show solidarity to their colonizer, all right, in a way to defend, their hegemony in the international system. For instance, Nigeria, Ghana, Gold Coast, Gambia, Sierra Leone supplied millions of military personnel, people, farmers retired or resigned from their farms to enlist in the British army in support to fight the war. So it was a watershed in the sense that the mobilization of resources, whether military, economic, logistic, was drawn from different parts of the world. It was a global affair, and that is what the question is about. So, in addition to enlisting in auxiliary military units, workforce were drawn from different parts of the world, and it had a dramatic effect on. So, internationally, the First World War, had especially dramatic impacts not only in Europe or Africa, but also on the United States and Russia. Although it remained officially neutral until 1917 when the US joined, the US provided loans to Britain and France to assist in their war efforts, and this massive transfer of wealth transformed the United States from a debtor nation into a major creditor. All right, so it marked a watershed also in this context, because the United States, it provided the leverage for the United States to become the superpower, the global hegemon, by lending money and resources to the allied forces, Britain and France. All right, and it projected the United States as a dominant force in the international system. Okay. So although it would take another generation for the US to become a dominant power, that is quite known, but its intervention in the First World War contributed a larger shift in political influence away from Europe. So for Russia, the outbreak of the First World War created the condition that led to the overthrow of the Romanov dynasty. All right. The failures of the Russian army, coupled with poor leadership and economic difficulties, underpinned the confidence, in the Tsarist. It undermined It undermined the confidence of the people in this, the Tsarist regime. And in 1917, Russia was plunged into a crisis that saw the abdication of Nicholas II, for instance. All right, you could see how the event of the 20th century, all right, led to internal crisis even in Russia. These are the ramifications that you have to analyze in your if you are trying to explain this question. So in Russia, the 20th century war, the outbreak of the First World War, propelled or instigated internal insurrection in places like Russia, where in October of 1917, a revolution in which the Bolshevik, led by V.I. Lenin, uh, were able to overthrow Kerensky's provisional government and took power themselves. So this event had profound implication not only for Russia, which was plunged into civil war, but for many countries around the world. All right, the 20th century indeed was a watershed in defense and strategy because it dislocated this political arrangements, the structure, the military formations of many countries were disrupted, were destroyed. All right, and for countries like the US, all right, it was important in the ascendancy of the US as a major power. For the developing countries, it was a period that led to the death of many people who volunteered or who were coerced, all right, to serve in the military formation of their colonizers. So the ramification is quite diverse and complex, and that is some of the things you need to analyze when you are trying to explain this question.